Once again, I am Ben from People Nerds. Thank you so very much for spending some of your Tuesday with us. This is Scaling Insight with Rolling Research. We are so very excited to have the guests we do today. With that, I'm going to introduce our guests for the day. I have Akilah Bledsoe, who is a research program manager at Facebook, and Zara Logue, a senior manager for user research at Github. Welcome to you both, and thanks so much for spending some time.
Thank you.
I was hoping we could start with brief introductions about maybe how you first heard about or thought about rolling or iterative research. We're going to get into much more detail, but I was hoping you might introduce yourself for the guests and then, or for the attendees rather.
Yeah, so I'm Akilah. I'm research program manager. I've been at Facebook about 4 years now. And we have rolling research programs across our 600-person org. Rolling research is really integral in how we do research and scale to make sure we can get the insights coming in as quickly as we need them.
Yep, and I'm Zara. I'm at Github right now. I used to be at Simple and actually worked with Akilah a long time ago at a place called Answer Lab. And Answer Lab was sort of my intro to rolling research because a couple different companies we were working with were doing these kind of weekly programs or bi-weekly programs to have regular research insights coming in and to be able to tell their product teams, hey, this is how to get in front of customers. So have sort of taken that model and tried to adapt it to the companies I've been at since then.
That's great. And these are two folks who I've had the pleasure with chatting for the last few weeks. They have been infinitely patient with my, do you want to sync one more time? And I can tell you they have so much great stuff to talk about. Let's get right into it. I'm going to stop sharing this and we'll move then into the full view and we'll start our conversation. All right. So let's begin, if we can, with defining what this is. The three of us went back and forth a few times on whether we should lead with just iterative research, just rolling research, call it rolling research that iterates. So could we talk first at what each of you defines or what you mean when you use these terms, iterative, rolling, either?
Yeah, I can start. So I prefer the term rolling research because I think it captures the various ways like a program can be set up. It doesn't narrow it. It keeps it nice and broad to make sure people can pretty much make it what they need it to be.
Yeah, and I think when we were chatting about this, it's more about sort of structurally setting something in place and using it to the best benefit for your particular organization. So whether that's with like a single team that wants to be doing things on a regular basis, and therefore maybe it's more iterative because that same team is getting insights about a particular topic over and over, or if it's more of a program to just be open to the entire organization and say, what do you have to put in front of customers? Let's do it. So I think we sort of came to the conclusion it's more about like establishing a structure and trying to fit different pieces into it and see which is going to work best, you know, for your particular situation.
And from our last conversation, both Akilah and Zara, each of you mentioned that iterative could be a potential outcome of a good rolling research program. That, you know, rolling is just another word of saying it's sort of always on. It's more about awareness within the org that if folks have a question, they know there's an outlet for it that they can either take part in directly or again lean on researchers and thinkers like yourselves. I thought that was an important distinction between, or rather part of rolling research, that if it's doing its job, it is iterative because the insights or the data keep coming in. And I think, Akilah, you mentioned this, it really should be feeding back into the program, sharpening the questions, looping in different stakeholders, and making the whole work more productive, if we can call it that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's honestly, it's research on a schedule. Right? It's at a set cadence. You can plan for it. Researchers can plan their research around it and through it. Honestly, it's something that's stable. And folks in the org or the research team, they know it's always happening and they can always plug in to make sure like everyone knows like we've got users here. We can ask questions about questions too and make our products better. So I think it's really good.
Sorry, my apologies, Keela. You
Okay.
have mentioned a few times that importance of deadlines, and I don't need to impress upon any of our attendees that, what is it? Research is only as good as the eyeballs that it's seen, or some various version of that, that adage. I'm
Totally.
curious if you could talk a little bit more about your transition from frontline, kind of do it all user researcher, designer, and thinker to now where you're now in the operations side, the
Mhm.
trying to scale and democratize that, how rolling research has made that possible. I'm very
Yeah.
interested in those
Absolutely. So,
evolvements.
as a program manager, I'm really, really big on schedules and
Sure.
timelines. They're like a huge thing for me. So, I say one of the best ways to tie everybody in is by being really transparent in terms of we're doing research every Thursday or research like the first Monday of every month or whatever that might be. And then working back from there to say, okay, if you got a question and you want to get in this new round, you need to put it in a week before. And it also keeps your designers and your engineers, quote unquote, on the hook to say, if you want to be in this, we need the mocks, we need the prototypes by X date, because we have to formulate the questions, we have to test it, make sure everything is working out. So it really brings everyone together when you actually have a set schedule for how to make this efficient and functional. That way, it's literally something that you can set your clock by, right?
Mm.
Everyone knows it's happening. Everyone knows if you want to be a part of it, or you even want to know the insights, the insights that have been delivered. They're coming 2 days after the sessions. So it's something that can pull everybody together, and also just make people excited. Like, we know insights are coming like the Tuesday, of the month, whatever it might be. We know insights are coming. We know where users are coming in.
Yeah, and I think it also, like, if you can have a schedule for it, it also helps just kind of build some visibility around it, like depending on whether or not you're, a co-located team or whether you're a remote team, sort of how you're going to handle people participating and viewing the research. So like it's simple, in particular, co-located team, mostly, some remote folks. So this was about sort of establishing like a space for the research to happen in sort of like a visible area. It was right as you were walking into like the big open office space that was shared by like our product peeps and engineering and stuff. And so being able to have like a physical space that people can just kind of like walk by, stick their head in, be like, oh, what is this person talking about? Bring their lunch into the room. Like, it can be a really nice sort of place to be able to do that, because people are like, oh yeah, it's, every other week I expect this thing to happen. But same for remote folks too, like being able to do sessions and broadcast them via Zoom so that people can drop in and out, and they can just kind of have this like ease of access, but plan for it. Like, know there's going to be a full day of sessions on this particular day, has been really helpful.
These are I'm furiously scribbling here because you're touching on some deeper foundational questions that I'm hearing from both research and design teams, which are, how do we get other folks to care about the work we do, even though it directly impacts the work that they have to do, meaning product teams, engineering teams, certainly more technically minded teams who might not be user research first orgs. They might need those data and those insights, but they're not necessarily going to say like, well, you know what we need to do? Let's do some in-homes. And they might say like, well, I need to know if, or I need to know how, or I need to know when. And that's where, of course, our user researchers like the two of you come in. And so it gets more of those folks involved. And it also feels like scheduling it puts it on the same level as other technical teams in terms of both importance and, building that visibility. Like, well, we're going to do agile sprints because there's so much that needs to be built, pressure tested, and then, ship and learn. Why don't we have research follow in that mold? Let's not make research a completely different animal. I mean, it doesn't always fit into agile, lean, or sprint sort of timelines, but it can. And rolling research is a way to get yourself working on that habit of setting schedules and socializing those schedules throughout the org. And then finally, it feels like if you do this enough, as I hope the two of you will talk about, you can finally get up to those levels where you're asking or being asked some of those strategy questions. I hear from frontline researchers all the time, I get that my work is important, that A/B testing or prototyping or usability lab testing is important, and I really want to get to some more strategy work. And they don't exactly know what they mean by strategy, but I think it's that itch that, like, you know, I was a trained sociologist, or I've got a background in anthropology, and so my expertise is like digging into this rich, like, but what does privacy really mean to people? Or, you know, why might you choose this service over another? And those are questions that can really impact product and design and a whole bunch of things. And it feels like rolling research can elevate the game of researchers such that they might be offered or get asked or have the space to say, let's do some strategy work. I'm curious if you've had any of experience in getting those heavier lift questions from rolling research programs.
Yeah, I think this is a good one because Akilah and I diverge a little bit. Akilah, do you want to go first, kind of speaking from the big scale
Yeah,
side?
so I think for us, like, rolling research is a way to scale up our researchers, right? There's a lot of us over here. You got 600 plus, but there's also a lot of things to cover. And so I think one of the biggest things that rolling research has enabled our researchers to do is to focus on those bigger questions, because they know the very important iterative questions or more usability questions can be covered in rolling research. They know they can get that covered. So they actually have the space and the mental wherewithal to think about the bigger pictures. And so for us, that's why we have so many, I'd say. And that's why they've taken so many different forms, because it kind of differs based on the team, based on the product that you're working on, where it is in the product lifecycle. But that's definitely one of the bigger things to scale up our research team.
Zara, how does that flex or change from where you are sitting now at GitHub?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different examples I could give. So, like, coming from Simple was a really small company, like 300 employees or something like that. And so this was kind of getting to the how do you show the value of research and then kind of get to answer those bigger questions. So at first, like, we instituted this kind of regular research program as a way to say, like, okay, executive team, we will do usability, we will test everything before it goes out the door. Maybe not everything, but we'll test things before they go out the door and get that kind of more tactical feedback for the teams of, like, this needs to move around, this doesn't make sense to people, etc. And I think it was a way to kind of over time be like, okay, this is interesting, but, like, what are those bigger sort of themes that come out of it that we keep hearing over and over about, like, people's mental models around money in particular, that kind of thing. And I think that the program that we had and kind of having that regular cadence was helping us to build some, you know, I don't know what the right word is, some trust, I guess, with the organization, and kind of think about other questions we could ask. With GitHub, it's a totally different animal. And so it's nice to have seen, you know, a couple different places. So at GitHub, we're doing more programs that are for the team specifically, but rolling. So it's more kind of like specific to a particular product area. What is the customer that they need to be getting feedback from? And how do we make sure that they're going back to them sort of on a regular cadence? So it's a little bit different in the sense that, like, there's already a lot of, like, trust for research at GitHub. So it's fine if you're going after those big questions. It's more about how do you help teams do that regularly.
Those are both great insights, and both of those comments are important because we've got questions here from folks about maturity of the org and how that affects the extent to which a rolling research plan can be initially created and the success of it. And then there's a question about small teams of one. So folks, both Bronwyn and Jennifer, we will get to those questions, and we'll use it as a nice segment, a segue to our next section, which will be, I wish we had some, like, but we don't. So sorry, y'all. You just got to deal with all this. Let's go to now that we have an idea of what iterative and rolling research might be able to do, you know, fix and get timelines in there, socialize and elevate the research practice, get stakeholders weaved in, even at the executive level. Let's talk about how you might do this. Now, I want to give a big caveat. These are two very smart folks who have done it at a couple of different orgs. And my guess is that to a lot of your questions, they might answer, it depends. So that, like with anything in, you know, design thinking or user research more broadly, you got to just try it and see how it works for your stakeholders, your teammates. The beauty of these folks is that they've had experience across a couple of different mature organizations working on different questions. So I am sorry if we don't get to the like, well, here's the exact way that you can. I know we like to distill those sometimes into those chunkable, listicle ways, but let's start with the structure that you each talked about. It sounds like to get started with a program like Rolling Research, you need structure, you need timelines. How do you go about doing that? Do you, what are some of the first foundational steps that a person out there needs to be thinking about if they're a small team or even a big team and they want to get going with a rolling research program? What's step one?
Zara, do you want to take this or you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think one of the first things you have to think about is timing. Because the first way to get burned out is if you're doing it so quickly that it's not sustainable. So one of the first things I always think about is how frequently does this need to happen for it to actually be actionable, and for whatever input you're getting from your designers and your engineers, you're not going to burn them out as well. Weekly rolling research, it definitely happens. We have definitely some teams in my org that do it. It is very difficult though, I would say, because it is nonstop. Biweekly, I'd say, is a little more common, but it also comes down to like how much work you need to do, and how much headspace as a researcher, or how much you can lean on an embedded ops team if you have that to help support it. So looking at your resources is the next thing. Like, do I need to go to a vendor to recruit participants? Or do I have an embedded operations team that can help me do that? So looking at who you've got to help you get it off the ground, and that helps you keep forking down the road. Sorry, you got anything else to feed in?
I think the only thing I would add is like thinking about, it's related to kind of the resources part, right? Like the more people you have that you can lean on to kind of minimize the work that you're doing around either the setup of it or the synthesis of it. I think like the danger in these programs, right, is like you're doing these things really quickly and then no one is like absorbing what actually comes out of them. And so for us, it's been really important to have like the product manager, maybe the engineering lead, definitely the designer, be involved in the sessions, like in terms of what questions we're going to ask, and then what's actually getting recorded during the sessions. So having people note take and whatnot, and having those debriefs, excuse me, after the interviews, so that you can sort of walk out of the sessions maybe even with, I know we'll get to deliverables specifically, but like maybe you're walking out of there without even necessarily having a formal written deliverable, because the people that needed to be there were in the room, and therefore like changes were being made during the session or the conversations were happening during the session. I think that enables you to do, more frequency if you need to really have the right people to move on the insights right away, as opposed to being like, now the researcher has to go create this deck or, write up all the things that they heard. That's been very helpful to us to have those involved, engaged teams.
Yeah, both of you mentioned on our last conversation reducing the distance, that one of the benefits of these programs can be reducing the distance between the decision maker, stakeholder, whatever noun you want to use, and the researchers creating the potential insights, that if they are in the room, as you said, Zara, or if you're using a remote platform and they're added as a viewer, or they have account access and can watch your session on Zoom or Dscout or whatever you're using, they can be there and they go, oh, that's what they're saying. And so then they don't have to read the deck that you're saying, this is what they're saying. And Zara, you mentioned something the last time we spoke that I wanted to talk about. It's another one of these cornerstone questions I'm getting a lot. And Akilah, you're in it now, given your role. And that's this idea of democratizing. Who can we loop into the research process? Who gets to be called the researcher? Zara, you had said something that, when you're creating these rolling research programs, it is a good time for you to think like, okay, if I'm a generalist researcher, who do I need in the room with me so I can, not stay in my lane, but flex the muscles that I have built and use the skills that I've crafted and honed, while making sure that the person who has the product questions is there and the person who has the design questions are also there. So I'm hoping you can talk a little bit more about the roles that make for a rolling research program. You touched on them briefly.
Yeah.
The things you should be thinking about.
I think like, I don't know, in the past, it's been more about like having the product manager there, having the tech lead or engineering manager there, or some of the engineers on the team, and like having the designer there. So kind of that typical EPD, engineering product design squad, being aware of the research, participating in it. At GitHub, the focus is really on democratizing uh, the skills of research across the organization. So our jobs are as much about like training up our PMs and designers to be the askers of questions and facilitating the interviews as it is about us doing that work ourselves. And so rolling research at GitHub has taken on, I've only been there for a couple months, also caveat, this is all evolving. But like one program I did was with a product marketing director. He's really interested in sort of learning better ways to talk to customers. And so what we did was set up a couple of weeks of sessions where we had like 6 people each week. I facilitated the first week. We talked about sort of like what came out of it. We did do a little findings doc. And then the next week I was going to be on vacation. And so his job during that first week was to kind of watch me moderate a couple sessions. He did one where I was giving him feedback via Slack as he was asking the questions. And so it's very much about also like, can we train people? Can we find people who are like really adaptable to this type of role, where we're not like so much giving up our expertise, but we're doing it in situations where it's a place where like people really can take part in the questions. So it's stuff around like messaging or brand or more usability type things where we do feel like other people can learn the skills sufficiently to be able to run those sessions.
Yeah, I would add one more thing in terms of what I think rolling research can help with. I think it's another way to bring your XFN partners along on the research journey. It's another vehicle to get like everybody in the car to see what it takes to get research off the ground, what it takes to get insights into product and things like that. So I think that's a really good use of it, because everybody is looking at that schedule and they're seeing how tight it is, right? To get the question, to get the guide written, and then getting the prototypes and then like testing and then running the sessions and then getting the insights and then getting the deck out or whatever type of deliverable you might need. So it's really a nice eye-opening opportunity, I think, for people to see all the different things that it takes to get research off the ground.
We're having a lot of questions from folks about the specific tools or general tools that you all have used in the past. You're talking about, Akilah, you've mentioned a few times that folks can publicly see the timelines or have it on a calendar. Are you,
Yep.
Is this publicly available? Are you adding particular people? Is there a repository that they go to and say, oh, here are the programs being run? What are some of the ways that you've socialized the structure so that other folks can get involved?
Yeah, so we use workplace groups, the different teams that have rolling research programs, either for a specific team or like across a product space. We have groups for that, and the different researchers will add their XFN partners. So it kind of just grows and grows and grows, and it grows organically, and it's really great to see when people start tagging each other in the different insights that are the different like the decks that come out and the different questions that are getting asked, to see like, oh, this would be helpful for our team. And this would be, or these insights would be really helpful for us, even though it's completely different. And so pretty much just people just keep getting added, and it just pretty much grows from there. And in that group, we pretty much have the schedule posted. We're saying like, okay, the next round is coming up. This is what we're planning on putting in there. Does anyone else have anything else? And it's also great because we chunk it out. So different parts may not be useful to everybody, but they'll see like, okay, great. The last 30 minutes of sessions, that's when it's like our time to shine and we should jump in. So that's so we can keep people engaged. If they only have a small amount of time, they know when something applicable for them is happening.
Yeah, and I think I feel like I'm learning on this one at GitHub because we're a bigger organization. At Simple, it was like tell a couple Slack channels that the research is happening, and then everybody knows that the research is happening. And so we would publicize it basically via Slack, in advance, like, here are the upcoming dates. Hey, product managers, who wants to take these different dates, and what's going to be your subject matter. And then we had a customer research Slack channel that would actually have like the Zoom links and the chitter chatter from like all the people watching the sessions. You could kind of go in there and follow what was happening during them. At GitHub, definitely we track everything in GitHub. Nobody uses GitHub like GitHub uses GitHub. So everything is tracked in projects and issues and whatnot. So it's definitely findable by anybody. And most people kind of are getting used to the fact that like there's a customer research team and they have a repo, and like that's where you go to find this information. But it's still, that's down a couple layers. And so we're trying to experiment with different ways of like, how do we let people know what we're doing? And so I feel like it's still evolving. It's a little bit of Slack and a little bit of internal kind of team posts and stuff, and just kind of like telling people 3 times, what you're doing so that they remember, kind of thing.
And we've got some questions from folks about
Yeah.
resourcing, which Zara, you and I, and Akilah, the 3 of us, were talking about wanting to mention on this discussion that, for some folks out there, this might be the first time they've thought about rolling research or heard about it, or this is something that they've really wanted to do, and they're the only one in their org who likely knows, to your point, Zara, that like they're the user research team at their place. And so I'm hoping we can talk about the scale of, I'm a Scrappy team of 1. Here's what you can reasonably expect to do in the next 3, 6, 9 months. And then if you're maybe at a place that's like Facebook or Google or Twitter, where there's a buy-in and a maturity around user research or empathy broadly, wherein we know human insights need to be seen, and yet we still want to do some more rolling research. I'm hoping we can talk about each of those cases. Again, knowing full well that we're making broad generalizations about those kinds of orgs and the kinds of roles of those orgs. So let's start on the Scrappy side, since the 2 of you certainly have those were your beginnings, doing this as and how you could. What does rolling research look like when your resourcing maybe is either unknown or low?
I'd say it's honestly, at the core, it's figuring out what you can do on your own that won't drive you crazy. So those sessions, it might be once every 2 months, right? Because you have so many other things going on that you can't fit a biweekly, right? So it's honestly, it's going to be a bit of a guess. And the best way to, I'd say, back yourself up with that kind of diving into the pool is setting expectations that you're working out the timing, right? You're working out who the audience might be for each round, if it's going to stay the same or if it might change each month. You're setting those ground rules so that you have the flexibility to make it actually functional for you. When you're a team of 1, everything's on you. So you want to make it the easiest lift you can. So you want to build yourself some space, right? So if you're doing it once a month, make sure you're looking at everything else you've got going on and put it on your easy week, right? If you have one of those, you definitely want to try for that, and be really clear about the expectations for the output of this ahead of time. If it's just you, don't tell folks you're going to give them a big deck. Don't do that, right? Don't do it. Tell them you're going to get a key findings email or your top 10 findings from the sessions, right? Keep it easy on you. And the best way to do that is just set expectations about what you can do, what your timing is, and how you're going to proceed with making it better from there. Especially as you get more resources, you can do more things. That's my take on it.
Yep. Yeah, I think sort of treating it as an MVP as we would with many other things, like in a product organization, right? Like, what's the minimum viable thing that we can do around research where we feel like it's valuable and we're not like burning ourselves out as the sole researcher. And I feel like so much of it comes down to recruiting. Like, how difficult is it for you to recruit relevant customers in your organization? And like I guess I've worked for a couple of companies where I've been very lucky in this arena where it's like, it's simple. It would be very easy for us to recruit customers who would definitely show up They would give us helpful feedback. They were articulate and awesome and all this stuff. And pretty much the same thing happens at GitHub, but it's a lot more difficult to reach out to them. Like we have more, policies in place around how we actually like touch customers. And so that is a huge part that I think you have to take into consideration is like, if you don't have any resources to help you with recruiting, then think about how long that's taken you in the past. What can you kind of front load? Like, could you make, an effort to do like 2 sessions in a month and kind of like have those people already lined up so that you're not doing that last minute juggling of like, this person canceled, I have to replace them. As much as you can kind of automate for yourself, also like using tools, Calendly, appointment scheduler, plugins, that kind of stuff. They automatically send a Zoom link. They automatically send your NDA for you. Those are tools that have been really helpful to me personally, like just doing the sessions at GitHub.
And Akilah, you mentioned about the role of ops in being able to scale something like this. I know that for our customers at DScout, well, 2 things. One, I know we're a research tool for researchers, and as a researcher in that place, the levels of meta there are quite heavy. One of the things that myself and the other researchers here have found successful when we're trying to get a rolling program, again, doing research on researchers, is tied to OKRs and KPIs. I think the 2 of you mentioned that before. If you're someone out there who's like, okay, great, I need to loop in stakeholders, but what the heck should I ask? If you're someone out there in an org who looks at or whose executive and leadership team is motivated by OKRs and KPIs, start there. What questions can you ask? And then that opens up a whole bunch. It might lead you to usability questions. I know we have some folks asking like, is it always, usability? Like it might be exploratory and discovery questions if you've got an OKR that touches on or needs that kind of data. And then, Akilah, you mentioned this a few times, getting stakeholders to the table or getting visibility for them. If you can say, hey, I've got some information that might turn into something that can help you, meet this KPI or get further along in this OKR, dude, you've done it for yourself. So if you're someone out there who's like still kind of churning, if you have access to or are in the stage of creating OKRs and KPIs, start there, man. Those can be really, really great ways to slingshot you into, again, just as these folks are saying, take a swing at something, do a few, invite some folks, and then see how it goes.
Yep. Yeah. And I think one place that's been a consistent theme across organizations is always like the new user experience, right? There's always a growth team. There's always some team that's trying to figure out how do we like just juice that metric around like whatever your metric is, monthly active users, engaged users, people who deposit money, all that kind of thing. That is usually a huge focus of your executive team and of a particular product team. So like that's one way into it too. Like if there's a particular product team at your company that you think would be like an excellent partner for this to kind of like do this MVP, if you know and are aware of like what that team is trying to achieve and you can tie it to that, that's definitely a way to get support later, because they'll say, hey, Akilah, you're so awesome. You helped us do all this stuff in a public Slack channel, right? And you're getting like these kudos and stuff. And then other teams are like, wait, what's happening? How do I get in on this? But tying it back to the OKRs is definitely like a place to show value. It's something you can tie the success of your program to, and growth teams, new user experience is always a great place to start.
Totally.
Well, we've got, sorry, Akilah.
No,
I'm curious if we could move to something that some of our question askers are lingering around, and that's, oh gosh, the TV's just turned on. I think someone's trying to share in our room. Another one of the fun parts of a startup when you don't have many conference rooms. I'm curious what the outputs look like. We've talked about Slack channels, copying and pasting quotes. I know for DScout, a lot of our folks create highlight reels and they just sort of drop them in Slack channels, or they'll drop a few of the charts in. Again, just like they're not delivering full reports because they know their stakeholders aren't likely to look at them, but they know their stakeholders have time to go, okay, these are the top 3 features. Here's the percentages of each of them. And here's a video of someone trying to navigate it. Like you said, Zara, like the onboarding experience really sucks at this one part. Here's an example of it. What are some of the deliverables that you have found to be successful in both looping people in and then starting, Akilah, as you said, that feedback loop wherein then they get questions and they sort of knowing the schedule can plug into rolling research and make it really cook.
Yeah, I think again, I want to ground it in the amount of lift it could take for the researcher or the group of researchers who are doing this. Sometimes it could be a little like a beefed up key takeaways kind of document, right? Or other times it also depends on what your organization consumes most. We like video over here, like we're real big on video. So sometimes it's quick snippets, as you were saying, Ben, of themes that have been pulled out. And most of the time we're pretty much directing people, the folks who asked that question, and also other folks we believe could benefit from that as well. They just might not have been thinking about it yet. So that's one way we definitely share. Video is really big, but also that takes time. So if you're feeling like that's not something you might be able to do, again, like that quick key findings doc is still very usable, and also it's easy to consume. It's very quick, so it's not going to take a lot of time to take it and say like, okay, great, so these are the things we need to keep working on. It's easy for everybody.
Yeah, and I think like not being afraid to repeat yourself in multiple places, like definitely go to the place like Akilah's speaking to, like where does your organization consume the most content. For GitHub in particular, it's within GitHub, so just tracking it. We use like if you're familiar with GitHub, we have these things called issues that we use to just track the entire project. So like here's the discussion about the questions we're going to ask, here's who we're recruiting, in kind of like a nice little table. We put their recordings in there if we recorded the interviews, and then that's where kind of like this, you know, top level findings kind of thing is recorded. But then it's like you have to be able to drive people to that too. So kind of like dropping little snippets in Slack in the team's channel. So going into that particular team, even going so far as to like comment on their user stories. Like if they already have a user story around this thing, like adding, you know, this supporting quote and finding from research. But that can take a lot of work to kind of like get into a team at that level where like you understand where they are in their process. So I think like as much as you can, keeping it very like digestible, very short. People's attention spans are short. It's annoying, but it's true. And putting it where they normally would consume it is great advice.
And have either of you seen that the bite-sized, more accessible styles of deliverables encourages them meaning the stakeholders, whoever they may be, to get more involved in the process? I've heard from some of our customers that they both like the excitement that their stakeholders experience when they see, you know, like a video reel from D-Scout and a couple of like quotes, and then they'd say like, well, I could do that. I could write one of those questions, which for a user researcher might be a welcome help. But I'm getting some questions here about like, yeah, but how do you both like sort of train some of your stakeholders to get involved in the rolling research and then somehow create not a bright line, but some demarcation between researcher space and like teammate, additional insights question space? I'm curious how that is happening where you both are.
Yeah, so I think one of the really important things about when you're setting up these rolling research programs is being really clear about what should be included and what should not be included, right? Because if you have a rolling research program that's pretty much for usability, it's iterative, that's it, you should not start putting like those foundational questions in there. Like that's going to break the whole thing. So when you're setting it up, that's when you can also like start educating your stakeholders that are participating, like this is what we're using this for. And when they start trying to, put in questions that don't really fit, that's when you can say that this is a great question. I'm really glad you brought it up, but I think we should think about that in a discrete project. Let's talk about that tomorrow or whatever it might be. So that's where you can really keep those boundaries to make sure the things that you're trying to tackle make sense in that form, in that venue, and the things that shouldn't be in there, you're not starting to like try to boil the ocean, as one of my old managers used to say.
It's the best term. Yeah, I think just that's where your sort of guidance and expertise comes into play. Like, we want to encourage people to participate as much as possible. If a product manager comes into a discussion guide of mine and drops in like 21 questions, I'm just like, that's amazing, right? It's like something we want to encourage. So figuring out some diplomatic way to kind of explain, like, hey, these are like the scope of things we can address in this 30-minute session, or if you're doing multiple topics with a single participant, like, we have to limit it to this discrete type of question. That's where you can kind of help people understand like what's appropriate, and what might be, more appropriate for a different type of research, a different type of methodology, that kind of thing. And that's when people, I think, start to, it's again just kind of like building that relationship and trust with people of like, no, yeah, really, I have done this, and like I know what will work. But we want to channel your enthusiasm into this next project. Yeah.
I've found that when I've talked to folks who are democratizing or working on either explicit scaling and democratizing projects, or just doing it sort of as you're talking about it, friend to friend, colloquially trying to get other folks involved. One of the byproducts is not only understanding about what user research or experience research can do, but also what the stakeholder do need a researcher for. Once the usability questions, they get kind of comfortable in sitting in an interviews or adding a few questions to an interview guide or doing some observations with you, or again, like jumping in on a platform, then it feels like that space, that strategy space opens, like, oh, well, we know a lot about this, but I'm really curious about what led them to, or what happens after. And so then that's when you, as the brilliant researcher, can go, ha, well, let's leverage some of our design thinking principles, or why don't I pull out my anthropology textbook and we'll dig into people's minds, because then your stakeholders have identified naturally that the need is there. And again, if you can say, yeah, and actually it fits with our OKR number 24, hopefully you don't have 24 OKRs, my goodness, but you might. I've found that that's one of the byproducts, is that as you educate your stakeholders on what you can do, the line for what they might not be so comfortable doing becomes clear. I'm hoping we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to some of the questions we haven't yet. So the last topic area is one that's just another. DSCOT has this new research report called Moves for Modern Research. I'll have Matt drop it in the chat if you haven't checked it out. So we asked hundreds and hundreds of researchers like Akilah and Zara, what are the things you're thinking about and sort of wondering about for the future of your org and for the research team in your org? And we've talked about a few of them. The one that we haven't touched on that is I think on the minds of some of our guests is repositories. So it naturally strikes me that, okay, if you're doing rolling iterative research, that means the data and insights go up. Where does it live? How do folks access it? And again, folks, we're not going to have the answers. We're going to have some, your mileage may vary here, but I'm hoping we can close with that discussion on what a repository related to or vis-a-vis a rolling research program might look like, what it can't do, success stories, anything you might be able to contribute to that.
Yeah, I off the bat, I can say where you don't want it to stay is with with that individual researcher, right? Or that individual product team. You don't want it to stay just with those folks. And I'd say what we've done is we pretty much like take it in chunks. So like 6-month chunks, go back and pull out the key themes that we've seen across those 6 months. And I want to be really clear there that's not pulling out every single theme, because that is just too much. It's really the key ones that are still present after like 6 months of research, right? And it'll also differ based on how you set up your rolling research project, whether it's for a product team or several product teams, right? The way the themes will evolve differ. But that's one thing we've done is just pull those themes out and try to think of creative ways for sharing them. So we've done one, we had like a deck that we've shared at the end of each half or each year, whatever it might be. We've also done one with video clips that we've shared in different places to get people like jazzed up to start the next round, to keep it like we're still doing this. We've got more things. We're working on these things. So that's another way to do it. Just you want to make sure things don't end up just sitting with that one researcher or one product team. You want to make sure it's being shared more broadly.
Yeah. I think, again, this is like an evolving thing at GitHub in terms of how we handle it. At Simple, we had a lot of different sources of customer feedback that we were combining into like this quarterly voice of the customer report. And so it was kind of like a natural place to be like, this is stuff that comes from qual, this is stuff that comes from analytics. You know, here's some like basically like top 10 customer pain points, top 10 customer loves kind of thing. At GitHub, we do have a centralized like customer research repo. Everything is in there that's a former project, but we don't have to sort of like what Akila's speaking about. We haven't yet gone through and tried to pull out like what the common themes are across projects. You know, I'm about 4 months in, so I feel like in a couple of months, like even I'm going to have done enough research where it would be possible to do that kind of thing and say, what are these major themes? But as far as like making it public, and you know, we're trying to figure out, I think, the best ways to communicate with people so we can just kind of like remind like, hey, here's all the things we've done and here's what we found. But still trying to figure out like what the best venue is for that.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to share these folks' emails so that if there's a question that we don't get to, and you just want to holler at them directly, here are their emails. So with that, I want to get to a few questions that we haven't yet. There's a lot of questions here about doing qual in quanti orgs. And I think both of you are at organizations that are human-centered, to be sure, and also use quantitative metrics to drive outcomes and resources. Are there any suggestions that you can give to someone, maybe even not just those doing rolling research programs, but those trying to do qual in a more quanti or metric-focused place to get them started doing this kind of work?
I can start this one if if you want, Akilah. I feel like so GitHub is like majorly the pendulum swings towards data. There was a future iteration of a customer research team that kind of like fizzled out, and then you know I was hired a couple of months ago to kind of like restart it. And we have some other people who have moved over from Microsoft, which is really cool. Like now we have an actual team, which is really exciting. So it's been about like making friends with the decision science team, right? And like I feel like research did this really well at Simple. Like we were a pairing of like the data science team would come to us and say like, hey, we're seeing like these particular trends and we don't have answers for them. Like we have no way of knowing like why people are doing this. It doesn't make any sense. You know, what does your team know that already know maybe that might help us answer this, or like how can we partner to figure that out? And it really comes from a place of like having that relationship with the data science or a decision science team in the size of org that I am in. This might be very different at Facebook, so we'll hear Akilah's answer, but it's really about making clear what we've done at GitHub just very recently is decision science and research are partnering on just kind of like this decision tree thing, right? Like, here's the type of question I want to answer. How does that kind of flow through? Like, what can decision science do really well? What does qual do really well? And where are the places where it makes sense to kind of answer it from both sides? So I think that's step A, I think, is like having a really good relationship with whoever your data people are, so that you see each other as partners instead of some kind of like adversarial, like, well, data can answer that better because it has, you know, significance, statistical significance behind it. And then the other part, I think, is, you know, talking to product managers about the different ways that they are measuring customer success. Whether it's through an experience metric, which honestly is like fairly rare at GitHub, or whether it's through more of like a typical like success metric or a revenue metric, whatever it is. Like, what are the different ways that qual can help inform increasing whatever it is that they're trying to do, and explaining some ways, like maybe historical examples that you might have of like, here's how we did this at a previous company, and it was really successful in this way. I think, you know, PMs are sort of like biased against qual sometimes because it takes time. You have to talk to people, you know, that kind of thing. But I think once people have that good transformational experience, they're like big advocates for it. So it's like finding those first partners that will be really great advocates for talking to customers, for doing qual, and using it to balance against whatever metric it is they're trying to drive.
I'd say definitely plus one to all of that. And in terms of thinking about like how do you make those relationships, onboarding is really huge. So if you know you have a new data scientist joining your team, meeting them to explain what you do, especially if they're not familiar with research, can be really helpful. And you start making a friend from the beginning, right? So it's also a really good training mechanism, right? So they understand like these are the type of questions that I can answer, and this is how I can support you. Right. And so making those swim lanes, as I know folks like to call it, at the front end can be really helpful. So you're not trying to like forge those when you have to, right? Making the friends when you don't necessarily need them is the best way, because then it's not a transactional relationship.
That's awesome. Getting involved with their onboarding, and Zara, what you said, making the decision tree. We do have some outstanding questions about folks curious about how you work with technical teams. Each of you has noted several times the importance of having QA folks, eng folks, engineering, and design PMs on and in these sessions, whether remotely or in person. And I think that's one of these where like your mileage is going to vary because we don't know who those folks are at your org, but they have goals that your research could help support or help them reach. And so understanding what those goals are, educating them a bit about the work that you do and how it can play nicely with, multiple regression or structural equation modeling that your data science team might be doing, or the types of things that your design team are building, that engenders empathy. Remember, if you're a user researcher, one of your core foundations and tenets is empathy. You're really good at empathizing with your user and bringing that story, hopefully, to the decision-making table. I would encourage you to do the same with your colleagues. They are, hopefully, working on a thing that you are working on together, some sort of larger goal. And so, flex that and say like, well, this work that I'm proposing would help you in this way. And I know that you need to learn these things, and we'll get to them. And, the yes and. So there were a lot of questions here about working with technical folks. And I think the two of you have done a really nice job with that. We've only got a few more questions, or a little more time for questions, but I'm curious if each of you, if there's anything we didn't get to that you think someone should know if they're looking to begin or join a rolling research team that we didn't touch on. Any lasting comments, anything that we've got some themes, but I'm curious if there's anything we didn't get to.
I wouldn't say this is something we didn't get to, but I want to make sure I say it again, like this is definitely not something that is impossible to set up, right? It's definitely something that you can do. You just want to take some time to sit back and think like, how can I make this work for me? And who could I pull along on this journey to make this like something that's sustainable? So it's totally doable.
Yeah. And like to add to that, like it can be super scrappy, and scrappy is fine. Like you don't need a fancy lab. GitHub has no lab. It's like all via Zoom. It's all very low cost. You can't give incentives because there's some rule against it. Figure out some other way that you can encourage customers to participate. Maybe you can give donations to a nonprofit or something. Maybe that's easier for your company to do than it is to give people like cash incentives, or if you have swag to give away that people desire, like, that's another way to get them to show up. I think just, kind of putting all perfectionism aside and just being willing to just like put something together and see how it goes. And just being really clear about like, if this doesn't work out, we'll try something else, like we'll give this 2 tries. And then like, if it's not valuable to you, if it's not valuable to me, then maybe we don't continue doing it. So just being really clear about expectations and being willing to be, scrappy on the setup.
That's great. And one of the things that I noted as we were both talking this time and last is that I think qualitative in particular, and I'm in this camp, qualitative researchers can sometimes be too precious with their research. Like, oh, but we really need to get it right. And there are times when you really do want to make sure that interview guide or that on-site visit and the outline that you have, or the survey, whatever it is that you're using, whatever tool or instrument you're using. Yes, precision and accuracy is important, especially when you're dealing with themes and exploring notions of culture and perception. And your stakeholders may over-index on just how precious qualitative is, such that we can get it wrong. And I think rolling research is a great way to show them qual is important. It can be speedy and meet timelines. It can index to the metrics and the OKRs that we're using to make business decisions. And I think the other thing that I'm hearing from the two of you is like, we as researchers need to sort of just like be okay with running scrappy work or not doing the perfect interview, because that probably doesn't exist. Did you learn some things that might help another team? Cool. Like, are you answering questions, right? Like Erica Hall's idea of like, are you answering questions? If you're answering questions, then you're doing it, man. You're doing it. So that's another thing for me that I continue to be struck with, is how this notion of precious research, and how there are times where we need to be careful with it because the topic might be sensitive or the impact on the business might be strong. And there are more often times when we just need to meet deadlines, and if we can inject some empathy into the decisions, cool, we've won. Well,
Yeah.
with that.
And I think this is like, oh, go ahead. You're going to wrap up. You're doing the thing.
No. I want you to stay here forever, but y'all have more important things to get to. But yeah, no, please continue, Zara.
I was just going to say one big hurdle for myself personally with this stuff is getting over like perfectionism in the discussion guides, formatting, stuff like that. And also the prototypes. Like, you may not get a lot of time with the prototype. Even if you tell the people the prototype has to be on a Wednesday because the sessions are on Thursday, you may still get the prototype Thursday morning. And so just getting over the fear of like, it's okay if you don't know everything. Have a partner on Slack who can be like, oh, they're on purpose. I did it on purpose. Here's what they should be seeing. That is a hurdle to get over, and it's real. As a researcher who's used to being like buttoned up and I'm ready to go, this is kind of like flying into stuff by the seat of your pants sometimes.
Yeah. Being comfortable with things being buggy and maybe stop working. It happens, right?
Yeah. It's a prototype.
Yep.
I love it. Well, Zara, Akilah, thank you so very much for our guests. Thank you again. You have emails for these folks. You can holler at me, Ben at DSCOT, if there's anything we didn't talk to. Thank you so very much for your time, and we'll hope to see you on the next one very soon. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all. Take care.